piece came out of my interest in spectral music, and it's kind of my influences from that tied in with my own sort of interpretation of spectral music. So the piece is basically an orchestral sort of interpretation of a cymbal swell. So about a minute long, played on a 22-inch ride cymbal, and at points during that swell, once I've recorded it and done a sort of a spectral peak analysis of the cymbal swell, I drew out the dominant frequencies from the microphone that the microphone picked up, and then used those pitches, those dominant pitches, as the pitches that would make up the chords in the piece. And then the piece itself is basically moving, as is a common practice in spectral music, moving from one chord to the next at varying sort of rates. And and then working with an orchestra, you've got so many colours that you can use, so many different ways of articulating chords and gestures and such, that it's sort of getting inside a sound and making it more interesting than you might think. So a cymbal swell on the outside, it seems like a fairly noise-like sort of sound source, which it is. It's a lot of frequencies with no real sort of ratio-based relationship with any kind of mathematical sort of formula underneath for overtones like you might find with more pure sort of string instruments and that kind of thing. And so I should say that was also something that drew me to using the cymbal for this piece. I wanted to work with what's called inharmonic spectra, where there's no kind of internal pattern for overtones of a sound source. So using the cymbal, it sort of was a nice challenge to try and make a noisy orchestra piece, but taking that challenge and using, as I was saying, the orchestral colours to really draw out the inner world of that cymbal sound. One thing about spectral music that also kind of appeals to me is that it's stylistically quite a broad church, so it's very much about more about the process, say analysing the timbre of something and drawing your pitch content from that. But from there, you can play these chords as you like, and so one piece of spectral music may sound quite different to another. There are very clear differences in the works of, say, Gerard Grisey or Tristan Murail or Saariaho, who are sort of three of the bigger names of spectral music, at least in its kind of genesis in the sort of late 70s. And then other composers who sort of took those processes on and had them influence their compositions through the 80s and 90s. There's quite a variety of results, of compositional results that come out of this sort of initial process. I didn't have any trouble with the NZSO players getting these quarter tones played. It was wonderful. It was one of those experiences where you turn up and so much work has already been done on their part, and they've got a lot of what they're playing just down. That was, going into it, something I was concerned about. It's always a little tricky when you start going between the notes with with different musical instruments. But that's one of the things also that really appeals to me about spectral music. I loved initially when I was first getting into it, these really in between harmonies that you would get where you may have long string glissandi and quarter tones elsewhere in other instruments, but then more equal tempered pitches amongst other instruments. But it was just really unique and sort of somewhere in between just total noise and some kind of consonance, and that really kind of grey area between consonance and dissonance in harmonic terms was just really appealing. It was I guess it was just something that was original to me, and I guess it's hard to find something original in music, especially as you get older. But it just really appealed in a harmonic sense, and then the way also that to move on from purely being between the spaces pitch-wise, having this other way of setting up sort of a sense of rhythmic logic or tempo in the piece, where you're not relying on traditional harmonic rhythm and chord progressions. You're having to, by taking, say, a small number of chords, in this case 13 chords, and moving through those across a space of about 9 minutes, you're having to kind of manage the speed at which you move from one chord to another, and any sense of acceleration that you can get in the piece of the piece really moving forward towards something is basically just by kind of gradually speeding up the changes from one chord to the next. So you may get the impression that things are moving along even though it's full of sustained notes. I might want to, at some point in the piece, because it's very process based, behind what sounds like quite chaotic music, there is quite a well organised process unfolding throughout the piece. But I thought I would take that sort of middle section of the work where it reaches its peak to actually just break momentarily and just I guess take some sense of predictability away by stripping this heaving orchestra right back and just interjecting with the cymbal and tam-tam little interlude. And so the two players that are on the cymbals are just playing these rounded swells that kind of jump from one to the other. And then once that's finished, the cymbal sort of drops in again with sort of a dynamic increase that leads into the continuation of the piece in another huge kind of quarter tone filled chord, and the piece then sort of moves downhill from there after going uphill for the first half. And structurally, I should also say the piece itself is organised in a rough swell shape, also kind of mimicking the sort of energy profile of a cymbal swell, starting off small and then building up to the kind of the crash, the noisiest point, and then just being left to vibrate and ring out. And what was surprising, I should also say, is that once I was performing the spectral peak analysis of the swell, once the cymbal started to vibrate gradually over time, there was more of a presence of these really low sort of contrabass pitches there, which is why the piece at the end is just really dipping down into this sort of what I call a contrabass landscape in the program notes, with tuba and contrabassoon and low harp strings, and just decorated with bass drum as well. It's so good to go into the space for the first rehearsal and you're already at such a high level of realization for your piece that the rehearsals from there, it seems like you're just having to tweak. It's just so much easier, and I appreciate the effort that they put into, because it's not a piece that they would usually play, and that's what's so good about these recordings. I think it gives a chance for New Zealand composers who are writing more contemporary stuff to have a professional orchestra play it, and play it wonderfully, and hopefully the orchestra gets something out of it too, sort of stepping out of what might be the usual repertoire to experience some of what New Zealand composers are getting into these days.